Hello, divine creations, divine marvels, children of God. Thank you so much for joining in. So, not so long ago, a very simple, humble man named Bruno Groening walked on this earth and did things. He actually said that he didn't do it, that he was just more a vessel or an instrument, but did things that left the people who saw it speechless. Blind people regaining their vision, paralyzed people standing up out of their wheelchairs. He made front page headlines. He performed healings under the direct observation of medical doctors. That he didn't take any credit for any of this. One time, 30,000 crowds as large as, we don't know the exact number, 30,000 people would gather and massive healings would occur. Can you imagine doing prayer energy work on 30,000 people and to have mass healings occur? And once again, he didn't take credit for any of it. Now, I really like to reflect on that. Bruno Groening being a conduit of healing for up to 30,000 people at a time, and him not taking any credit. And I contrast that with myself, where there's always, ooh, look what I did, or oh, I did so good. And of course, I'm doing things much less significant than being a vessel of miracles. So Bruno Groening for me is one of my humility heroes, meaning he lived and demonstrated humility to such an extreme, not such an extreme, such an extent. And he shows us that humility does not mean weakness. I don't know about other languages, but in the English language, the word humility kind of has this connotation of weakness attached to it. A very similar word is meek, and yet it's written in the Bible, or the English translation from a verse from the Bible. It says, "The meek will inherit the earth." Well, what does that mean? So while Bruno Groening was humble before God, he wasn't afraid to speak his mind before other people, and he wasn't obedient to other people, even as parents. As a child, his parents would tell him, he loved going to the woods, and his parents would tell him, don't go to the woods. And he would go anyway, and he would get beaten, and they would tell him not to do it, and he would just still go. He followed something other than people. And he came to have a direct knowing that what he was following was God. And before God, he was, to the best of my knowledge and my understanding, he was obedient and humble. And he often described himself as a child. Now, isn't that the last word any one of us as adults would want to describe ourselves as? To describe ourselves as a child. And yet Bruno Groening was adamant that he was a child, and a child before God. So most of us come to Bruno Groening come to this teaching because we're either seeking healing, we're seeking help in our lives, or we want to draw closer to God. And while we have our part to do, Bruno made it very clear that we can't do it without God. He would say things like, you cannot raise yourself up. Only God can do that. And let's see if I can find the other one I'm thinking of. I'll have to go from memory. He said, "We cannot help ourselves. Only God." Well, I don't want to. That sounds wrong. That's close, but the essence of it is, Bruno would say things like, "We are dependent on God, and that we belong to God." And I would add that we belong with God. And Bruno said, "He who is arrogant will find himself flat on the floor in no time." Meaning, he's actually, Bruno said, "He who puts himself above other people will find himself lying flat on the floor." Meaning, if we're arrogant, if we put ourselves above others, we will be humbled, and probably not in a fun way. So let's really sit with what it means to humble ourselves before God, and that this doesn't mean it's going to make us weak or powerless. That's what many people fear. That's what I sometimes have felt feared when I've thought of being humble. But let's be clear, we're not humbling ourselves before other people. We don't want to put ourselves above other people. But what Bruno calls us to is to humble ourselves before God. So let's spend a little time really reflecting on spiritual humility and taking in divine energy, which is so easy to do. Sitting with our legs uncrossed, feet flat on the floor, hands on your legs, palms facing upwards, back not stiff, but not slouched, just a relaxed, upright position. And close your eyes and think of something that makes you happy. Now, handing over our burdens, our illnesses, challenges, problems, worries, fears, anxieties, judgments, resentments, all the unfun stuff, handing it over to God or to a spiritual helper such as Bruno we trust. And then observing the body, having the will, the intention to take in this goodness, to take in this good energy while observing the body. Noticing what you feel. Taking in this good energy. Welcoming the peaceful quiet. Absorbing good healing energy. I'd like to thank everyone joining in live and everyone watching this video. Welcome, Claudie. So, humility before God. It sounds so quaint. My introduction to spirituality was really sort of classical Indian, meaning Hindu philosophy. That's where I was already curious, but that when I found that, um, but then soon after, I sort of got interested in various new age, what you could call new age metaphysical, spiritual things, and then when I came across the idea of, and I'd heard of humility, but having spent all this time, in all these various, well, I'll just mostly call it, new age type things, the idea of humility sounded a little quaint to me. Like that's a little old fashioned. And but I've come to realize it's actually a very profound and deep um, way of being humble before God and recognizing our utter dependence on God. A child is utterly dependent on their parents. And according to Bruno Groening, in that way, we are utterly dependent on God. It's a little easier for us to get away with it. You know, if a little child runs away from their parents and another adult doesn't find them, they'll die very quickly. We as adults, now that these bodies are a little more mature and we know how the world works, if we run away from God, we can live our whole lives disconnected from God. But Bruno pointed out that, or feeling disconnected, not us actively seeking that connection. And Bruno pointed out that in that sense, we're not really living on a simple level because God is life itself. Now, on another level, that really raises the question, where does happiness come from? Because as human beings, we're all seeking happiness 24/7. You could argue we're seeking happiness or we're seeking love. I'm not going to, different people might language it differently, but in essence, we're seeking something good 24/7. Everything we do, every action that we have is an attempt to find happiness or love. Every thought we have is seeking out, um, sometimes very unskillfully and but behind it all is this desire for goodness and happiness. And the question is, where does happiness lie? Well, here's what Bruno Groening had to say on the topic. He said, God possesses everything that human beings need. Humans have forgotten that. Now, as I reflect on my life, I've spent most of my life seeking romance, seeking money, seeking friendship, seeking all these different things. I'm not saying any of those things are bad or wrong by any means. And from a spiritual point of view, in essence, what if all these different things we're seeking, we're actually looking for God? What if we're looking for life and love and goodness itself? And we're trying to do it in all these ways that, yes, of course, all those things are good. Friendship and romance and money and even fun and adventure, all those things, very wonderful part of life. But when I spend too much time focused on those things and too much of my energy being like, oh, that'll make me happy. Like, I thought I'd taken it down, but I had a profile up on a personal site, and I thought I'd taken it down, but I just got an email saying "Oh, we have a," like, "someone expressed interest in you." And it was like, I was in a good mood, but there was this like, "Oh my gosh," it was like so much excitement just from a little email, and of course, I don't know who the person is, and, um but that's kinda how we are as humans, right? Like, "Ooh, the new movie's out," or, "Ooh, so and so is interested in me," or, "Oh, I wanna," you know, I think I'm gonna get a raise this week. And again, I'm not saying any of those things are bad, but the question is, do they give us what we really want or need? Do they give us that full feeling of wholeness and happiness? That's what I feel when I tune in. I feel whole and at peace. So you could say love, happiness, peace. Um, now Bruno Groening said God has everything we need. Human beings have forgotten that. And he also said to be connected to God. That is everything. The German word Verbindung means joined, linked, communion, a very deep, not like a hi, how are you doing connection, but a very, very deep communion. So let's reflect on all this. Where does happiness come from? And does God have everything we need? Is being connected to God everything? Please don't take my word for it. Please. I'm just a guy on the path with where I'm just a guy on the path. I'm no guru, no saint. And Bruno Groening, who I would feel comfortable calling him a guru or a saint, what he said is don't believe me. Find out for yourself. So let's spend a little time reflecting on all this, observing our bodies, taking in this good energy. Hmm. So when I think about um, well, happiness, what it is that I believe every human being is seeking, and depending on the day, some days, yeah, some days I say it's love, some days happiness, some days peace, but they all feel kind of like, and by love I mean like true, like eternal, ongoing love, not just you know an amazing romantic experience. divine love. So when I think about it, and in Indian philosophy, they say there's really two ways of going about seeking for happiness. One is through things, enjoyment, um, through things in the world, and the other is through God. And they say people who are that there's really just two ways to find happiness. Of course, within that there's different variations, but you're either going for what they call bogha, which means enjoyment, or you're going for yoga, which means union with God. So the two are considered very separate paths. And, so there's kind of this idea of like, well, you're either enjoying the world or you're being a monk. And then is why I'm really grateful. And there's many spiritual teachings like that. Um, and then we have Bruno Groening, who talks about God as the life and nature as life. And yes, Bruno talks about being not attached to things, but Bruno talks about living a life guided by God. So as opposed to having to choose between enjoyment or God, the path Bruno calls us to is to seek to really listen to God and to then do what's right and to be guided. And I would say that to find and to have balance. The he spoke often this German word Ordnung, and um, technically Ordnung just means order, but as I've really meditated on it, it feels more like it means harmony and balance. It also means regulation, like the way the body regulates itself. It keeps itself in balance. If I'm not a doctor, so I may have my facts a little bit wrong here, but if you get too hot, the body sweats, which helps it to cool down, and if you get cold, then the body sort of contracts, which helps keep heat in. So it just has this kind of regulatory um, process of keeping itself in balance, and that's Bruno spoke of God as Ordnung. He said, um, I can't remember the exact quote, but just that um, God is Ordnung, this grand harmony, this balancing force and capacity. And, um, this idea of enjoyment or just seek God, like be a person in the world or be a monk or a nun. It's a little, I don't want to criticize it per se, but in essence, what Bruno Groening responds to that is just follow God. You'll be guided to enjoy things in a healthy way, and you'll be guided to stay connected to God as you enjoy those things. And that part of life is doing, that we all came here with a very specific task, very specific, you could say, mission. There's a famous American comedy where the main characters say, "We're on a mission from God." Some nuns sent them to go do something. It's maybe I just dated myself a little bit. It's from the late 70s. Um, but we're all on a mission from God. And 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 all of us, I think, I know I am, are seeking this balance between like being a human being in a body, yes, and enjoying life in healthy ways while following God. Because I certainly have gone way too spiritual, quote spiritual, and way too hedonistic, just enjoying life in ways that weren't so healthy. So these are a lot of big ideas and things to think about, and um, think about approaching life from this place of staying connected to God and joyfully serving God in ways that and serving life and doing good in ways that feel good. And so that's kind of my model for life. How do I stay connected to God and joyfully serve? Um, and to make it even more simple, and just to quote Bruno, mm, mm, mm. I only listen to and follow God, which you should also strive to do. If God is goodness and love and life and harmony, then following God is going to be our only route to happiness. Now we need to be careful because a lot of us were taught wrongly about God and what it means to follow God. Um, and if God is the source of everything, and if God is goodness and love and life and peace, then ultimately that's going to be where our happiness is. And the way to get there is to connect to God and seeking to be led by God. As Bruno said, listening deeply inside to our conscience to decide which actions are harmonious and which thoughts are harmonious. If we're not feeling in, if we're not sensing into what thought or feeling, how to behave, what to say, which thoughts to say yes to, which thoughts to say no thanks, then we're just operating on habit and um, probably not the best of habits. So I'm sorry to say I goofed up the scheduling today. I didn't realize I forgot that I normally don't have an appointment Saturday afternoon, and I do. So I need to cut today a little short. And I'm very grateful to everyone who came here today and everyone who's watching this video after the broadcast. And I very much welcome people's comments and thoughts and feelings on this path of of this balance of following God and enjoying life. So let's take a minute and close and continue to take in these good feelings. Determining, really getting determined to follow the good, to seek the good and follow it. To face challenges. Part of the school is staying connected to God even when there's challenges, doing the good even when we don't want to. I'd like to thank everyone for joining in. This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. Having contemplated formally becoming a monk many times in my life. And it's the teaching of Bruno Groening that I feel has really helped me find some balance between these um, supposedly opposite ways of being in life and in the world. Thank you so much for joining in. Ultimately, I think just it comes down to us doing our duty. And our duty ultimately is to follow God, and then we each have our individual part to play in what Bruno called this great divine work. Thank you so much for joining in. We'll be doing this again real soon. For anyone who's new to this channel or this topic, you can read more on my website, www.thehealingstream.org. And I do these broadcasts currently very often here on this channel. Thank you so much for joining in. Take care. Much love.